Welcome back to the 3D rock texture project. We're now in Photoshop, and I have here a texture from Texture King, and I have the two rendered Maya text images, and then another texture here. So I'm going to bring these two into this for the background, and the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to right click duplicate layer, and under document type choose that document which has this DSC number here and click OK. The reason why I'm doing it this way, I'm going to do it with this one too, right click duplicate layer and choose that same number, is that they will basically end up in the exact same location that way, which it's down a little bit, but they're both there. What I can do is hold shift key on both of these, and I can move them however I want. I can even group them. So I'm going to hit Control G maybe to group them. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control A or Command A on Mac to select all, and make sure I have the Move tool selected. That way I can use the Align tools up here. I'm going to align the center here and vertical and horizontally. So I have the text here in the center here. And then I'm going to hit Control D or Command D on a Mac to deselect. Now let's open up the group again. So one of these is just a textured layer, and then one is just the material applied. So let's turn off the material one and look at this texture one. It doesn't look like much right now, but if we zoom in, you can see texture there. What's happening here is Maya has a exposure adjustment that needs to be applied into Photoshop to get it to render properly. So that's under the exposure adjustment. So if I go to the adjustments here and look for the exposure one, which has a plus minus, and click on it, it's called the gamma correction. So I believe it was 2.2 is the correct amount, and now you can see the texture pretty much just like you would in Maya. Problem is it's affecting everything in the background, so you have to clip it. So there's a couple of different ways. You can hold Alt or Option and click right between the two layers, and that clips it. The other way is when you double click on it and it's active, is click on this little icon here, and that will clip it to the layer below. So now the exposure is just affecting the texture. Now I could work with this texture, but I'm not particularly crazy about it, to be honest. So I think what I'll do is I'll bring in this texture here. So let's grab this, drag it up, and then drag down into here. Now it's a very large texture, so I can reposition it wherever I want. Again, this was from Texture Kings. In fact, I can clip it by holding on Alt or Option and click, and then I could change the blend mode, say to multiply or overlay, and see how that would interact with the other texture. And if it looks okay, we can work them together. But I'm actually not really digging the interaction between these two textures. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I kind of feel like it would probably work better directly on the gray texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up to the next layer, and again hold Alt or Option and click to clip it, so it's just affecting the text. And then turn off the other two, the bottom ones actually here. And basically what I do is I create a duplicate copy when I hold Alt or Option on that texture. But I kind of like the texture with the text. The reason why is I like the bevel sort of quality of the text, just stands out a little bit better, and I think it just looks better overall. So in this tutorial, there's a couple more things I want to share before we finish up, and then the next tutorial will have a final sort of wrap. The one thing I want to adjust is the color for the background, and then the drop shadow perhaps for the text itself. So the drop shadow is very easy to do. Just double click on the text layer, add a drop shadow, click on the word drop shadow here, and then you can click in here and move around and see where you want that shadow to appear based upon the lighting. But what I'd like to do is create a spotlight effect in the background first and decide where do I want the shadow to be like and what do I want it to look like. So I'm going to click on the background layer here. I'm going to right click on it and go to Convert to Smart Object. What this will allow me to do is basically make filters parametric rather than static. So I'm going to choose under Filter, go to the Render setting, and choose Lighting Effects. Lighting Effects is really fun. And it defaults to quite typically the spotlight, but there's a couple of different kinds. You can choose a point light or infinite light. So you have those three options. And the one I want to choose is the spotlight. And it has this little widget here, so I can basically move it around and you can see how the light's being affected. So what I want to do is kind of move the light down here in the corner like so. You can also grab either end of the light to kind of widen it. So it's a very cool little widget here. It's very interactive. You can grab from the center here and kind of move it around. Then you have all your settings in here. Now I'm going to leave the color to white, but you can adjust it to a different color. You can raise or decrease the intensity here. By default, this should have none for the texture applied. That's why it looks a little bit different here. Also, you have the ability to change the exposure here, which will make it a little bit brighter. So that'll kind of do the overall exposure versus the hotspot, like increasing the hotspot range. So I can increase that just by dragging that little slider there. The gloss metallic you can kind of play around with and see, what kind of effects you'll basically get. And then the ambient light is basically the outside light. And how much of that do you want to bring into the scene? So I want this to be a little bit lighter. I don't want it to be quite so dark. So I'm thinking, I don't want it to be like that, even though it looks kind of fun in some ways. A drop shadow is not going to read real well, so I'm going to have it about maybe like there. And under texture, you can have fun here. Now watch this. When I switch to the red channel, see this texture that applies? What it's using is the channel of the actual layer itself. So we have red, green, and blue channel. And blue seems to be usually the one to pick. And you can basically go in a negative or a positive direction and see how that texture is being applied in there. Typically I like to keep this value very low, like 1 is usually really well if you like it. It just gives a little bit more shine to the light. Again, if you don't want it, just select none. So you can kind of see a difference between none and having switch back to the blue here, just a little bit extra shine throughout. I think I am going to keep it, but I am going to keep it really low at 1. To complete and escape out of lighting, all you got to do is hit enter or return on a Mac. And it'll take usually a few seconds. And because we made this a smart object, it comes with a smart filter. And now if we want to, we can adjust the lighting effects through a gradient if we want to mask out part of the effect, and we can double click on the lighting effects and bring it out again, which is pretty cool. So it is now completely parametric. So I'm going to hit return again to accept that change. And what I want to do now is add the drop shadow to the text. So again, we ignore this text. We decided to go with this other text. I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to add a drop shadow. But this time I'm going to click in the multiply and choose something that's dark inside the text here. I think will look good. And then click OK. That's just for the coloring. And then what I want to do is move the shadow as if the light here is casting the shadow up to the right a little bit. And now we can kind of play around with the spread and the size to make it a little bit crisper. I don't want this shadow to be quite so soft. So if you adjust these in a certain way, for example, if you increase the size, you really blur it out basically. The spread is just going to poof it out quite a bit, but it's the size that really blurs it or sharpens it. I want it to be a little bit sharper. Something like that will look pretty good. And then I can click in here and kind of move around to see exactly what kind of angle I want. I think in something like that would look kind of cool. And then we may do also, let's see, we could try a color overlay and see what that would look like. I'm not sure if that would be cool, but let's see. If we try a linear dodge add and click in here, and I'm going to choose something that's kind of light gray maybe. And then click OK, and let's see what would happen here if we increase the opacity. So you can see what you can do here. You can create different kinds of effects. I am thinking with this though, what I'm going to do instead of trying to do a color overlay here is we're going to do some interesting new tricks in the next tutorial for the final composite here. We're going to mess with the mask and do some hand painting on top of the type to really make it stand out. At this point though, I'm pretty satisfied with this Maya text. I like the lighting behind it. I like the rocky kind of quality, and this is a good basically stopping point. So the next tutorial we're going to cover again is we're going to wrap everything up with the final compositing in Adobe Photoshop CC, and see you soon. Cheers.